There is a unique kind of silence that appears after a relationship with a super empath comes to an end. It is not the peaceful silence that comes with acceptance, and it is not the silence of closure. It is the silence of someone standing among the remains of something they personally destroyed, slowly understanding that some things cannot be rebuilt once they have been broken beyond repair. This is the silence a narcissist eventually encounters. They may surround themselves with new people, chase new attention, and collect endless moments of admiration, but that emptiness continues following them. Because what disappeared was not just another relationship. What they lost was the one person who reflected something genuine back to them. When people discuss narcissism, most conversations focus on the damage they create from the outside perspective. They talk about manipulation, emotional control, gaslighting, idealization, and the painful cycle of pulling someone close before pushing them away. Those experiences are real, and they leave deep wounds on the people who endure them. But there is another side of the story that many people rarely explore. What happens internally inside the narcissist after they betray someone who truly saw them? What happens within their mind when the person who understood them on a deeper level finally walks away? This is not about excusing their actions or offering them sympathy. It is about understanding the psychological collapse that happens afterward, because that understanding can become the final step toward healing. The moment the super empath understands why the narcissist struggles after losing them, something changes. They stop waiting for an apology that may never come. They stop searching for signs that the narcissist finally understands. They stop wondering whether the narcissist is secretly suffering or whether they have moved on. They begin to release the emotional attachment completely. The question that matters is not only what the narcissist did to the super empath, but also what the super empath represented in the narcissist's world. What did this person provide that others could not? What made this connection feel different from all the others? The answer begins with understanding something called narcissistic supply. A narcissist often depends on external validation to maintain their sense of identity. They need attention, admiration, approval, and constant confirmation from the outside world to feel valuable. Without that reinforcement, they do not simply experience disappointment. They can experience a deeper internal instability because their self-image depends heavily on how others respond to them. This is why they are constantly performing. Every interaction can become a stage where they present a carefully created version of themselves. Their confidence is often not built from genuine self-worth, but from the reactions they receive from others. They need people to believe in the image because, on some level, they struggle to believe in themselves without that reflection. However, something important is often misunderstood. Not all forms of validation have the same impact. There is a difference between ordinary admiration and a rare emotional connection. Many people around a narcissist only respond to the surface. They admire the appearance, the charm, the confidence, and the carefully constructed personality. This type of attention may feel good temporarily, but it never reaches the deeper emptiness underneath. It is like trying to satisfy a deep thirst with something that only makes the thirst stronger. The narcissist keeps searching for more because the attention never truly fills the space inside them. The performance continues because the wound underneath remains untouched. Then the super empath enters their life, and the entire dynamic changes. The super empath does not simply react to the image being presented. They notice the person behind it. They may recognize the insecurity hidden beneath the confidence, the fear beneath the control, and the pain beneath the arrogance. They are able to sense emotional layers that others overlook. Instead of only seeing the behavior, they see the wound that created the behavior. This ability creates a connection unlike anything the narcissist is used to experiencing. For perhaps the first time, someone is responding not only to the mask, but to the person underneath it. For the narcissist, this feels completely different from ordinary attention. It is not simply another source of admiration. It feels like being discovered after a lifetime of hiding. Imagine spending years creating defenses, controlling what others see, and carefully protecting the parts of yourself you believe would never be accepted. Then someone appears who can see through those defenses and still chooses to stay. They recognize the flaws, the fears, and the contradictions, yet they continue offering compassion. They provide something the narcissist may have secretly wanted for years but never knew how to ask for: the experience of being truly seen and still being accepted. This is why the connection with a super empath can become so powerful for a narcissist. It is not only about receiving attention, it is about experiencing a version of themselves that feels more authentic. Around this person, they may briefly feel what it is like to exist without constantly proving their worth. They may catch glimpses of a self that does not need a performance, a self that can simply be human with imperfections, wounds, and emotions. Those moments can feel incredibly powerful because they touch something deeper than surface-level admiration ever could. But this is where the painful contradiction begins. The very thing they desire most is also the thing their defenses prevent them from accepting. To truly receive the love and understanding offered by a super empath, the narcissist would have to become vulnerable. They would have to lower their defenses, confront uncomfortable truths, acknowledge their actions, and face the pain they have spent years avoiding. They would have to sit with the shame hidden beneath the false image they created. But their entire psychological structure was often built around avoiding exactly that experience. So instead of allowing the connection to transform them, they take from it without truly opening themselves to it. They receive the empathy, the patience, and the emotional depth, but they resist the inner change required to maintain it. The super empath represents something the narcissist has rarely experienced before: a form of love that does not disappear the moment things become difficult. Someone whose understanding runs deeper than appearances and whose compassion remains steady even when the narcissist begins testing the limits of that connection. And the narcissist often will test it repeatedly. They may create conflict, pull away, provoke emotional reactions, become distant, or act in ways designed to discover whether this person will eventually do what others have done before: leave, abandon them, confirm the belief they have carried for years that love is temporary and that being truly seen will eventually lead to rejection. But the super empath does not immediately walk away. They remain patient. They continue seeing the person beneath the behavior. And this creates an experience the narcissist was never psychologically prepared to face. Every time the super empath responds with understanding instead of rejection, they challenge one of the deepest beliefs inside the narcissist. They unknowingly provide evidence against the painful story the narcissist has carried since childhood. The story that says people cannot be trusted. The story that says vulnerability is dangerous. The story that says if someone truly knows who you are, they will eventually leave. Through their patience, the super empath sends a message the narcissist struggles to accept but cannot completely ignore. Maybe being flawed does not make someone impossible to love. Maybe wounds do not define a person's entire existence. Maybe there is another way to experience connection. The narcissist may reject this truth consciously, but somewhere beneath all the defenses, a wounded part of them hears it, and that hidden part becomes deeply attached to the person who made them feel this possibility. This is why losing a super empath affects the narcissist differently from ordinary relationship losses. It is not simply the ending of a romantic connection. It represents the loss of the one person who provided evidence that they could be accepted beyond their image. Many people in the narcissist's life may have been connected to the version they created for the world. They admired the confidence, the charm, the success, and the carefully managed personality. They responded to the character the narcissist presented. But deep down, the narcissist knows that this is not the same as being truly known. The super empath offered something different. They connected with the person beneath the performance, the parts hidden behind the defenses, and that made their love feel more real than anything the narcissist had experienced before. So when the narcissist eventually destroys that connection through the patterns that define their behavior, whether through emotional cruelty, betrayal, manipulation, or repeated acts that finally become impossible to ignore, they lose much more than a partner. They lose the one person who reflected their humanity back to them. They destroy the very relationship that showed them they could be accepted without constantly pretending. The painful reality is that the narcissist often creates the very outcome they fear most. They push away the person who offered the deepest acceptance because receiving that kind of love would require them to confront the parts of themselves they have spent a lifetime avoiding. What makes the ending even more powerful is the way the super empath leaves. They do not always leave in chaos or emotional destruction. They do not necessarily leave with endless arguments or desperate attempts to make the narcissist understand. Instead, after reaching their own point of awareness, they leave with clarity. They leave with the calm strength of someone who has finally recognized their own worth. They leave after spending a long time trying to understand, trying to forgive, and trying to hold space for someone else. But eventually they realize that choosing themselves is not cruelty, it is self-respect. And this kind of departure creates an impact the narcissist cannot easily dismiss. In previous relationships, the narcissist may have been able to create explanations that protected their self-image. They could convince themselves that people left because they were too sensitive, too weak, too insecure, or simply unable to handle the narcissist's personality. These explanations allow the narcissist to avoid facing the deeper reality. They maintain the belief that the problem was never truly them. The other person simply failed to understand them. They failed to see the person underneath. They failed to recognize their value. But the super empath removes that excuse completely because they did see everything. They saw the insecurity beneath the confidence, the pain beneath the anger, and the fear beneath the need for control. The super empath saw the hidden parts that others never reached. And despite seeing those parts, they still chose to love. That is what makes the final departure so difficult for the narcissist to process. Because when the super empath walks away, they are not walking away because they misunderstood the narcissist. They are leaving because they understood them too well. Their message is not, "I could not handle who you are." Their message is much deeper. "I saw you completely. I understood the wounds, the fears, and the reasons behind your behavior. I saw the person you tried to hide from everyone else. And after knowing all of that, I still choose myself." That does not feel like simple rejection to the narcissist. It feels like a judgment they cannot escape. There is something about the aftermath that very few people understand, including the narcissists themselves. There is a painful emptiness that appears when the person who reached the deepest parts of them is no longer there. The narcissist usually does not remain alone for long. They often seek new attention quickly because being without external validation feels unbearable. A new connection may already be forming before the previous one has completely ended. They move forward rapidly because slowing down would force them into a place they desperately avoid. Silence, reflection, self-awareness. Without distractions, they would have to confront emotions they have spent years suppressing. But this time, something is different. The super empath reached a place inside them that others never touched. They may not have changed the narcissist completely, but they created a small opening in the defenses. They showed them a different experience of connection. They allowed them to briefly understand what it feels like to be accepted without performing. And once someone has experienced that level of emotional depth, it becomes difficult to completely forget it. The narcissist begins to recognize the difference between being admired and being truly seen. They understand the difference between someone loving the image and someone understanding the person beneath it. This realization follows them into future relationships. New connections may provide attention, attraction, excitement, or admiration, but something feels missing. It is not necessarily because those people lack value. It is because they are not the super empath. They do not possess that same combination of emotional awareness, patience, and ability to see beyond the surface. They cannot recreate the exact experience of being deeply understood by someone who could hold both their strengths and their wounds at the same time. So the narcissist continues searching for something they lost, often without fully admitting what they are looking for. What the super empath provided inside that relationship was something incredibly rare. They became an emotional container for feelings the narcissist could not process alone. They held space for contradictions, fears, insecurities, and emotions that the narcissist had buried for years. They created an environment where the narcissist could have been more than just an image. They could have been human. They could have been imperfect. They could have been real. But because the narcissist's defenses were built around avoiding vulnerability, they could not fully accept the very thing they needed most. And when they lost the super empath, they lost the person who carried that emotional weight with them. The inner world of a narcissist can be filled with constant emotional instability. Without a strong internal sense of identity, without a healthy connection to their own worth, and without the ability to process painful emotions in a balanced way, they often exist between extreme emotional states. One moment they may feel superior and untouchable, and the next they may fall into emptiness, anger, or deep insecurity. They move between needing to appear powerful and fearing that underneath everything there is nothing truly valuable there. This creates an exhausting cycle where they are constantly trying to maintain an image while secretly battling internal chaos. Most people cannot stay connected to someone living in this level of emotional disorder. They either become convinced by the performance and never recognize the turmoil underneath, or they eventually sense the instability and create distance. But the super empath responds differently. The super empath has an unusual ability to remain centered even when another person is emotionally overwhelmed. They do not immediately absorb the narcissist's anger as their own. They do not collapse when faced with criticism, coldness, or emotional attacks. Instead, they often try to understand what is happening beneath the behavior. They recognize the fear behind the anger, the insecurity behind the arrogance, and the pain behind the defenses. Over time, the narcissist begins depending on this emotional stability without fully realizing it. The super empath becomes the person who helps bring order to emotions the narcissist has never learned to manage internally. From the outside, this dynamic can sometimes look like ordinary emotional dependence, but it goes deeper than that. The super empath often becomes an external source of emotional balance for the narcissist. Their calm presence creates a temporary sense of stability inside someone who struggles to create that stability alone. When the narcissist feels like they are losing control, the super empath's grounded nature helps restore a sense of calm. When their identity begins to feel threatened, the super empath reflects back a sense of worth. When their hidden emotions begin rising to the surface, the super empath often becomes the person who absorbs the intensity and helps contain it. But when that person finally walks away, the narcissist is left facing everything they once placed onto someone else. This is the part of the loss that the narcissist may never be able to explain to others. It is not the same as a healthy person missing someone they deeply loved. It is something more connected to survival and emotional dependence. It can feel like losing a support system they never realized they relied on. Suddenly, the emotions they used to release onto the super empath have nowhere to go. The anger that was once absorbed by someone else remains inside them. The shame that was softened by another person's compassion becomes louder. The emptiness that was temporarily hidden through deep connection becomes impossible to ignore. They are forced to confront a painful truth. They do not know how to sit with themselves because they spent years depending on others to regulate what they could not regulate alone. For much of their life, the narcissist may have used people as emotional mirrors, sources of reassurance, and ways to stabilize their fragile sense of self. They relied on external reactions to determine how they felt internally. But the super empath was different because they provided something far more complex than simple admiration. They offered emotional depth, understanding, patience, and the ability to see beyond the surface. When that person disappears, the replacement often does not feel the same. New relationships may provide attraction, attention, or validation, but they cannot recreate that unique connection. The narcissist may continue searching from person to person, hoping to find someone who can quiet the internal storm the way the super empath once did. But what they are searching for may no longer be available. The super empath eventually redirects that emotional energy back toward themselves. The same compassion, patience, and understanding they once gave to the narcissist becomes the foundation for their own healing. They stop trying to rescue someone who refuses to rescue themselves. They stop carrying emotions that were never theirs to hold. They reclaim the parts of themselves that were neglected while they were focused on understanding another person's pain. The door that once remained open through endless patience finally closes, not out of revenge, but because the super empath has learned that their own peace deserves protection. There is another layer to this loss that reaches even deeper than losing attention, emotional support, or a source of stability. It is the realization that the super empath did not only see who the narcissist was, they saw who the narcissist had the potential to become. And this is what can become the most painful memory. In quiet moments, after the distractions disappear and the performance ends, the narcissist may be confronted with the awareness that someone once looked beyond their defenses and recognized a possibility within them that they struggled to recognize themselves. The super empath did not only notice the wounds, the defenses, and the unhealthy patterns. They also saw the person hidden beneath them. They saw the possibility of someone capable of genuine connection, honesty, vulnerability, and growth. Their belief was not based on ignoring reality. They were not blind to the problems. They saw the difficult parts clearly and still believed there was more beneath them. They held space for both truths at once, who the narcissist was in that moment and who they might become if they chose healing over protection. This kind of belief can feel both powerful and frightening to someone with deep emotional defenses. Somewhere beneath the denial, the anger, and the resistance, the narcissist may have felt the impact of being viewed this way. Someone looked at the complete picture and still saw value. Someone believed there was a person worth saving beneath the patterns. But accepting that belief would require something extremely difficult. It would require honesty. It would require vulnerability. It would require facing the painful parts of themselves they had spent years avoiding. True change requires a type of shame that transforms rather than destroys. Not the defensive shame that turns into anger, blame, or attacks against others. It requires the quiet kind of self-awareness where someone can look at their actions honestly and decide they want to become different. It requires accepting responsibility, allowing themselves to feel uncomfortable emotions, and letting go of the identity they created for protection. But the narcissist's defenses are often designed to prevent exactly this process. So instead of stepping toward transformation, they return to what feels familiar, the mask, the control, and the emotional distance. In choosing the familiar defenses, the narcissist does not only lose the super empath, they also lose connection with the version of themselves that the super empath believed was possible. The potential was not necessarily absent, it was simply never developed because the narcissist refused to confront what was required to reach it. The super empath may have been one of the few people capable of walking beside them through that difficult process, but healing can never happen for someone who refuses to participate in their own transformation. And while the narcissist remains trapped in old patterns, the super empath begins a different journey. They do not collapse after leaving. They do not become the broken person the narcissist may have expected them to become. Instead, they rebuild themselves. They take the emotional strength, awareness, and capacity for love that once went toward managing the narcissist's chaos and turn it inward. They begin healing the parts of themselves that were neglected. Their confidence returns. Their peace returns. Their identity becomes stronger because they are no longer measuring their worth through someone else's struggles. The super empath begins creating a life that feels more authentic. They develop healthier relationships. They experience joy without guilt. They carry themselves with the quiet confidence of someone who survived a difficult chapter and gained deeper clarity from it. They are no longer controlled by the need to be understood by someone who refused to understand themselves. They become more connected to who they truly are and more aware of what they will and will not accept. And if the narcissist observes this transformation from a distance, they may eventually understand the truth they tried to avoid. The super empath did not become better because the narcissist lost them. The super empath became better because they finally stop carrying the burden of someone else's unresolved pain. Their growth becomes evidence that the relationship was not what allowed them to shine, it was what prevented them from shining fully. The person they once believed needed the narcissist was actually being held back by the very connection they thought they could not live without.